Vito Hayes watched his million-dollar cryptocurrency empire crumble in real time as Detective Sarah Mitchell bled out 30 feet away, her radio crackling with desperate calls for backup that would arrive too late to save either of their lives. His finger hovered over the delete button that would erase 3 years of digital money laundering evidence, while her service weapon lay just out of reach. Both of them trapped in the same nightmare for completely different reasons. Within the next 6 hours, one of them would be dead, the other would be a ghost, and Miami's underground would never be the same. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. 3 hours earlier, Vito had been just another successful tech entrepreneur sipping espresso at his penthouse office, monitoring his legitimate venture capital firm's portfolio while simultaneously tracking untraceable Bitcoin transactions worth $40 million. The irony wasn't lost on him that his real business, laundering money for half of Miami's criminal enterprises through an elegant network of blockchain startups, operated more efficiently than most Fortune 500 companies. He'd built an empire on the foundation that dirty money moved faster when it looked clean, and technology was the perfect washing machine. His secure phone buzzed with a text from Rico, his head of security. Cops sniffing around the warehouse. Might be time for that extended vacation. Vito deleted the message automatically. Muscle memory from years of paranoia. The FBI had been closing in for months, but they needed evidence, and evidence was something Vito had made sure would vanish faster than morning mist in South Beach. The legitimate side of his operation was impressive enough. Hayes Ventures had funded 12 successful startups in the past 2 years, 3 of which had gone public. His investors believed he was a genius at spotting emerging tech trends. They weren't wrong. Vito just happened to have additional criteria for his investments that traditional venture capitalists didn't consider, like how easily company finances could be manipulated to clean illicit funds. His assistant knocked and entered without waiting for permission. "Mr. Hayes, Detective Thompson from Metrodate is here. Says it's about the pro-chain investment." Vito felt his blood pressure spike while maintaining perfect composure. Pro-chain was his crown jewel, a legitimate blockchain company that also happened to process ghost transactions worth millions monthly. "Show him in and activate the standard protocol." Detective Thompson was exactly what Vito expected. Early 40s, tired eyes, cheap suit, and the desperate air of a man grasping at straws. He sat across from Vito's glass desk, notepad ready, playing the role of the methodical investigator, while Vito played the role of the cooperative businessman. "I understand you've made significant investments in cryptocurrency companies," Thompson began, his pen poised over paper that Vito knew would be meaningless in an hour. "Blockchain technology is the future, Detective," Vito replied smoothly. "My firm has invested in 17 related companies this year alone. All completely legitimate enterprises, I assure you." What Thompson didn't know was that Vito had been expecting this visit for weeks. Every document the detective might request had already been scrubbed. Every paper trail had been designed to lead nowhere, and every digital footprint had been crafted to show nothing more suspicious than aggressive but legal investment strategies. For 30 minutes, Vito answered questions with the patience of a man who had nothing to hide, while internally calculating how many more hours he had before the real evidence would surface. His encrypted servers would self-destruct at midnight if he didn't input his daily code, taking with them the financial records that could put him away for 3 lifetimes. After Thompson left, Vito allowed himself exactly 30 seconds to acknowledge the reality of his situation. 3 years of building the perfect criminal enterprise, and it was all about to disappear. But he'd always known this day would come. The smart criminals were the ones who planned their exits as carefully as their entries. He initiated the evacuation protocol, sending coded messages to his key people. By tomorrow morning, Vito Hayes, the venture capitalist, would have died in a tragic boating accident, and someone else entirely would be watching the sunset from a non-extradition country. The beauty of having multiple identities was that you could kill off the problematic ones and start fresh. His phone rang. Rico again. "Boss, we got a problem. That undercover op we suspected? It's real and it's happening tonight. They've got warrants for the warehouse, the office, and your place." Vito closed his eyes briefly. Somehow they'd moved faster than anticipated. "How long do we have?" "Hour, maybe 2. There's something else. They've got someone inside the organization, have for months." The betrayal hit harder than it should have. Vito had always known trust was a luxury he couldn't afford, but he'd allowed himself to believe that loyalty bought with money was still loyalty. Who? Don't know yet. But whoever it is fed them everything. Financial records, client lists, the whole network. Vito hung up and looked out at the Miami skyline one last time as a free man. 42 floors below, traffic moved in predictable patterns. People lived their normal lives. And somewhere in that maze of civilization, law enforcement was closing in on him with the patience of hunters who had finally cornered their prey. He had approximately 90 minutes to become a ghost, and the first step was destroying every trace of Vito Hayes that had ever existed. But as he prepared to burn 3 years of his life, he had no idea that his carefully planned disappearance was about to collide with Detective Sarah Mitchell's undercover operation in a way that would save her life and destroy everything he thought he knew about the line between good and evil. Detective Sarah Mitchell's chest felt like it was on fire as she crawled behind the shipping container, her backup nowhere to be found, and her cover blown in the worst possible way. The bullet had gone clean through her shoulder, but the second shot had caught her vest wrong, cracking ribs and making every breath feel like drowning. Her radio crackled with static, whether from interference or damage she couldn't tell, but either way she was alone in a warehouse full of people who wanted her dead. If you're watching this, subscribe, and let me know where you're watching from. 6 months of deep cover work had led to this moment, and it was all falling apart because Tommy Vasquez couldn't keep his mouth shut when he was nervous. She'd watched him fidget during the meeting, seen the sweat beading on his forehead despite the warehouse's chill, and known with sinking certainty that her carefully constructed identity as Sofia Restrepo, money courier for the Colombian cartels, was about to be exposed. "Find the cop," she heard Vito Hayes' voice echo through the warehouse, calm and controlled even in crisis. Sarah had been studying him for months, building a psychological profile, learning his patterns. He was supposed to be the mastermind behind a sophisticated money laundering operation. But hearing him coordinate a manhunt with military precision reminded her that underestimating him had been her first mistake. Through the gap between containers, she could see men spreading out in a systematic search pattern. These weren't street thugs or desperate criminals. They moved like professionals, communicating with hand signals and clearing areas with tactical efficiency. Hayes had military contractors on his payroll, which explained how his operation had stayed invisible for so long. Her service weapon was in her right hand, but with her shoulder injury, accuracy was going to be a problem. She had maybe 6 shots before reloading, assuming her spare magazine hadn't been damaged in the fall. The smart play was to find an exit and call for backup, but the smart play hadn't been working out for her lately. Sarah's phone was still functional, miracle of miracles, but when she tried to dial dispatch, she got nothing but dead air. Hayes's people had jammed communications, another sign of professional-level preparation. She was cut off, outgunned, and bleeding in a warehouse controlled by one of the most wanted criminals in South Florida. The irony was bitter. 3 weeks ago, she'd been confident that Hayes was just another white-collar criminal who'd gotten in over his head. Her research showed a successful venture capitalist with a weakness for high-risk investments and a tendency to ask too few questions about his clients' money sources. The FBI profile painted him as a target of opportunity, someone cartels used rather than a true criminal mastermind. They'd been wrong about everything. "Sophia," Hayes's voice called out, the fake name he knew her by delivered with almost conversational tone. "I know you're hurt. This doesn't have to end badly for you." Sarah almost laughed, which would have been a mistake for multiple reasons. Vito Hayes offering mercy was like a shark, suggesting they discuss vegetarianism, possible, but not something you'd bet your life on. Her training kicked in, years of tactical preparation overriding the fear and pain. She needed to move, needed to put distance between herself and the search teams, needed to find a way out that didn't involve a body bag. The warehouse was massive, filled with legitimate shipping containers that provided both cover and confusion. She could hear them getting closer, boots on concrete, the occasional whispered instruction. Hayes was running this like a military operation, which meant they'd find her eventually, unless she changed the game. Sarah made a decision that would either save her life or get her killed faster. She fired 2 shots into the air and immediately moved, using the noise and muzzle flash to mask her position while drawing their attention away from her actual location. The response was immediate, professional, controlled return fire that sparked off shipping containers but didn't spray wildly. Even hunting a cop, Hayes's people maintained discipline. As she moved through the maze of containers, Sarah realized her months of surveillance had given her one advantage. She knew this warehouse's layout. Hayes used it as a central hub for his legitimate business operations, and she'd studied the shipping manifests, the loading dock schedules, even the security camera positions. The office complex was on the second floor, accessible by 2 staircases and an industrial elevator. If she could reach Hayes's private office, she might be able to access his communication systems, call for backup, maybe even find evidence that would make this nightmare worth surviving. But first, she had to survive the next 5 minutes. "Last chance, Sophia," Hayes called out, his voice closer now. "We know you're police, we know you've been feeding information to the feds, but we also know you're hurt and alone. Surrender now, and you'll live to see tomorrow." The offer sounded almost sincere, which made it more terrifying than threats would have been. Vito Hayes wasn't angry or emotional. He was solving a problem, and she was just another variable in his equation. Sarah checked her ammunition and tried to ignore the warmth spreading down her side that was definitely blood. 6 months of her life had led to this moment, and she'd be damned if she was going to die in a warehouse because some tech entrepreneur decided to cosplay as a criminal mastermind. She moved toward the stairs, unaware that Vito Hayes was doing exactly the same calculation she was, and reaching the opposite conclusion about who was going to survive the night. Vito reached his private office as the sound of gunfire echoed through the warehouse below, his mind already 3 steps ahead, while his body operated on pure tactical instinct. The wounded cop was moving toward his position, which meant she either had a death wish or knew something about the building's layout that she shouldn't. Either possibility made her more dangerous than a random undercover operation gone wrong. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. His secure laptop was already wiping its hard drives, a process he'd initiated the moment the shooting started. 3 years of encrypted financial records, client communications, and operational data were dissolving into digital nothingness while he pulled up the warehouse's security camera feeds. The screen showed his teams moving through the lower level with professional efficiency, but the cop, Sophia or whatever her real name was, had vanished into the maze of shipping containers like smoke. Rico's voice crackled through his earpiece. "Boss, she's moving toward your location. Kid's got brass." "I'll give her that." Vito almost smiled despite the circumstances. Professional respect was something he rarely felt for law enforcement, but this woman had maintained her cover for months, infiltrated his organization, and was now playing a tactical game while injured and outnumbered. Under different circumstances, he might have offered her a job. The security feeds caught movement near the east stairwell. There, a flash of dark hair, the distinctive way she moved her left shoulder. She was definitely hit, but not badly enough to stop thinking strategically. Vito pulled up the building schematics on his tablet, mentally tracking her possible routes while calculating how long his digital cleanup would take. "Sir," Rico's voice again, "SWAT units are staging 2 blocks out. We've got maybe 15 minutes before this place is surrounded. 15 minutes to eliminate a federal witness, destroy evidence, and evacuate a 3-story building." Vito had survived worse odds, but never with quite so many variables in play. The smart move was to cut losses, eliminate the cop, and disappear. Clean, simple, efficient. His fingers paused over the security system controls. From his position, he could lock down every electronic access point in the building, trap her wherever she was, and let his people finish the job. One button press and detective whoever she was would never testify about anything she'd seen or heard. For a moment, Vito found himself hesitating. The woman fighting for her life 3 floors below wasn't just another obstacle to overcome. She was someone who'd risked everything to expose what she believed was wrong. There was something admirable about that kind of conviction, even if it was directed against him. When was the last time he'd met someone willing to sacrifice everything for their principles? When was the last time he'd done the same? Through the office's reinforced windows, Vito could see the Miami skyline glittering in the distance. Somewhere out there, federal agents were coordinating the biggest bust of his career, preparing to dismantle everything he'd built. In a few hours, Vito Hayes would be either dead or disappeared, and the woman trying to reach his office would be just another casualty of a world that demanded violence as payment for ambition. The elevator dinged softly. Someone was coming up. Vito drew his sidearm, a Sig Sauer P320 that had never been fired outside a shooting range, and moved to a position that would give him a clear line of sight to both the elevator and the main stairwell. His military training from a lifetime ago kicked in, muscle memory overriding the businessman facade he'd worn for years. But instead of the elevator doors opening to reveal armed tactical teams, the display showed it stopping at the second floor and returning to ground level. Someone had used it as a distraction while taking the stairs. The cop was smarter than he'd given her credit for. Vito's secure phone buzzed with an encrypted message from his banker in the Caymans. Transfer confirmed. New identity package ready for pickup. His exit strategy was fully operational. In 6 hours, he could be on a private jet to a country that had never heard of extradition treaties, starting a new life with enough money to buy a small island. All he had to do was survive the next 6 hours. The stairwell door burst open, and Detective Sarah Mitchell stumbled into the hallway, her weapon raised despite the blood seeping through her jacket. She was pale, breathing hard, but her grip was steady and her eyes were focused. This close, Vito could see that she was younger than her surveillance photo suggested, maybe late 20s, with the kind of determined expression that had probably gotten her into and out of trouble her entire life. "Vito Hayes," she said, her voice steady despite the obvious pain. "You're under arrest for money laundering, racketeering, and conspiracy to commit murder." Vito kept his weapon trained on her, while internally appreciating the absurdity of the moment. "Detective Mitchell, I presume, though I have to say Sofia Restrepo was much more convincing than this." Her eyes widened slightly, surprised that he knew her real name, confirmation that his intelligence network was better than she'd anticipated. "How long have you known?" "About your identity." 3 weeks. "About the federal investigation?" 6 months. Vito took a step closer, noting how she adjusted her stance to compensate for her injuries. "Your department has a security leak, Detective. Someone's been feeding us information about your operation from day one." The revelation hit her like a physical blow. Vito could see her mind racing, trying to process the implications, wondering who in her own department had sold her out. It was a useful distraction, but he couldn't afford to let it last long. "Here's what's going to happen," Vito continued, his voice calm and reasonable. "In approximately 12 minutes, this building is going to be surrounded by federal agents. You're going to bleed out in about 20 minutes, unless you receive medical attention. And I'm going to disappear in the next 10 minutes, whether you're alive or dead to witness it." Sarah's weapon never wavered. "Or I could just shoot you now and solve everyone's problems." Vito smiled, genuinely amused. "You could try, but you're right-handed. Your dominant shoulder is injured and you're losing blood fast enough that your aim is probably compromised. Meanwhile, I'm uninjured, professionally trained, and highly motivated to avoid federal prison." The standoff stretched between them like a taut wire, two people who understood that the next few seconds would determine whether they both walked away from this warehouse or whether only one of them would see tomorrow's sunrise. Neither of them realized that in 60 seconds, Vito Hayes would make a decision that would save Sarah Mitchell's life and destroy everything he thought he knew about himself. Close to the warehouse's fire alarm system exploded into chaos as Vito heard the distinctive whine of helicopter rotors approaching, which meant the feds had moved up their timeline and were about to turn his carefully planned exit into a desperate escape. Detective Mitchell swayed on her feet, but kept her weapon trained on him, blood loss and determination fighting for control of her nervous system. In the next 30 seconds, both of their lives would change forever, though neither could predict who would be saving whom. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Vito's tactical training screamed at him to take the shot, eliminate the witness, destroy the evidence, disappear into the night. But as he watched Sarah fight to stay conscious, something unexpected happened. Instead of seeing a federal agent who could destroy his life, he saw a woman who'd spent 6 months risking everything to bring down someone she believed was dangerous, someone who threatened innocent people. The irony wasn't lost on him that she was right. "Rico," he spoke into his earpiece while keeping his eyes on Sarah, "initiate the Lazarus Protocol. Full building evacuation now." "Boss, what about the cop?" Vito made a decision that would either redeem him or damn him. "She's coming with us." Sarah's eyes widened in surprise and suspicion. "I'm not going anywhere with you." "Detective, you have about 3 minutes before shock sets in from blood loss. The federal agents surrounding this building are going to take at least 10 minutes to clear it safely. assuming they don't encounter resistance from my people. Basic math says you're going to be unconscious or dead before help arrives. Through the office windows, Vito could see black SUVs taking positions around the warehouse perimeter. FBI tactical teams were deploying with the efficiency of professionals who'd done this before, but they didn't know about the building's hidden passages or the escape routes he'd planned for exactly this scenario. "Why would you help me?" Sarah asked, though her voice was getting weaker. Vito holstered his weapon and pulled a first aid kit from his desk drawer. "Because 3 months ago my organization moved $40 million for the Moreau cartel, money that came from kidnapping children and selling them to human traffickers. I told myself it was just business, just numbers on a screen, but you made me realize that every transaction has real victims." He moved toward her slowly, hands visible, medical supplies ready. "Your investigation forced me to confront what I'd become. The least I can do is make sure you live to see justice done." Sarah's weapon dropped slightly as her strength failed. "You're confessing? I'm offering a trade. Your life for my cooperation. Full disclosure of financial records, client lists, transaction histories, everything the FBI needs to dismantle the money laundering networks I helped build." Vito caught her as she collapsed, the adrenaline finally giving way to the reality of her injuries. Up close, he could see the determination that had carried her through months of undercover work, the strength that had kept her fighting, even when everything went wrong. "My real name is Sarah Mitchell," she whispered, as he applied pressure to her shoulder wound. "I have a nephew who's 7 years old." "If I don't make it—" "You're going to make it," Vito interrupted, surprised by how much he meant it. "I give you my word." He activated his building's emergency medical system, overriding the lockdown protocols to summon automated assistance. The warehouse had been designed for legitimate business operations, which meant it included safety features that most criminals wouldn't bother with, including a sophisticated trauma response system. "Boss!" Rico's voice through the earpiece was urgent. "FBI is moving in. We need to go now." Vito looked down at Sarah, unconscious but breathing steadily. His escape plan called for leaving immediately, using the confusion of the raid to disappear into Miami's underground network. He had new identities waiting, offshore accounts, and extraction routes that would put him beyond federal reach within hours. Instead, he picked up Sarah's radio and switched to the emergency frequency. "This is Detective Sarah Mitchell's position," he spoke clearly into the device. "Second floor northwest office. She's been shot and needs immediate medical attention. I'm surrendering myself to federal custody." Rico's voice exploded through his earpiece. "Boss, what the hell are you doing?" Vito removed the earpiece and dropped it on the floor. Through the windows, he could see federal agents responding to his radio call, moving with new urgency toward the building's upper levels. In a few minutes, they'd find Sarah and get her the medical attention she needed. In a few more minutes, they'd arrest him and begin the process of dismantling everything he'd built. He sat down beside Sarah's unconscious form and waited for his old life to end. When the FBI tactical team burst through the office door 3 minutes later, they found Vito Hayes sitting with his hands visible, a wounded federal agent receiving first aid, and a complete confession waiting on his laptop screen. The team leader's radio crackled with surprise. "Command, we have the suspect in custody. He's surrendering voluntarily." As the paramedics worked on Sarah and federal agents read him his rights, Vito realized that saving Detective Mitchell's life had accomplished something his years of criminal success never had. It made him feel human again. But as they loaded Sarah into the ambulance and led him toward a federal transport vehicle, neither of them knew that this was just the beginning of their story. The real test would come when Sarah discovered that the man who saved her life was also the man whose organization had been responsible for crimes that would haunt her dreams for years to come. And Vito would soon learn that redemption wasn't just about confessing your sins. It was about learning to live with the consequences of trying to become someone worth saving. 3 days later, Sarah woke up in Jackson Memorial Hospital with tubes in her arm, bandages across her shoulder, and FBI agent Lisa Chen sitting beside her bed with the expression that somehow managed to combine relief with professional frustration. The pain medication made everything feel slightly unreal. But the memory of Vito Hayes catching her as she collapsed was crystal clear, which posed problems she wasn't ready to address. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. "Detective Mitchell," Agent Chen said, setting aside her coffee and leaning forward. "How are you feeling?" "Like I got shot in a warehouse, and then had the strangest fever dream about a criminal mastermind playing medic, Sarah replied, testing her voice. Everything worked, though her shoulder felt like someone had driven a truck through it. Chen's expression grew more serious. About that, we need to discuss what happened in Vito Hayes' office. Your report is going to be crucial for the prosecution. Sarah shifted carefully in the hospital bed, trying to process the complexity of what she'd experienced. He saved my life, after I'd spent 6 months trying to destroy his. That's not exactly standard criminal behavior. No, it's not. Which is why his cooperation has been unprecedented. Chen pulled out a tablet and scrolled through pages of documents. In the 3 days since his arrest, Hayes has provided detailed financial records, client information, and operational procedures for money laundering networks spanning 12 countries. We've already made 37 arrests based on his intelligence. The scope of it was staggering. Sarah had known Vito was running a sophisticated operation, but the investigation had revealed something closer to a financial empire. What's his angle? Nobody confesses to federal crimes and then volunteers additional evidence unless there's a strategy. Chen hesitated, which immediately put Sarah on alert. That's what we're trying to figure out. He's refused legal representation, declined plea negotiations, and hasn't asked for anything in exchange for his cooperation. According to his statements, he wants to make amends for the harm caused by his actions. Sarah almost laughed, which would have hurt too much to be worth it. Vito Hayes doesn't do anything without calculating the benefit. There's an endgame here we're not seeing. Maybe, or maybe almost dying in a warehouse with a federal agent gave him a change of heart. Chen's tone suggested she didn't believe that any more than Sarah did. Either way, he's asked to see you. Multiple times. The request sent an unexpected flutter through Sarah's chest that had nothing to do with her injuries. 3 days of medication-induced dreams had been filled with images of Vito's hands, applying pressure to her wounds, his voice promising she'd survive, his eyes showing something that looked almost like genuine concern. Absolutely not, Sarah said automatically. He's a suspect in an active federal investigation. Contact between us would compromise the case. Normally, yes, but the situation is complicated. Chen pulled up another document on her tablet. Hayes has provided evidence of corruption within local law enforcement. Someone in the Miami-Dade Police Department was feeding his organization information about your undercover operation. Sarah felt the bottom drop out of her stomach. She'd suspected something was wrong during her final weeks undercover, but having it confirmed meant that someone she trusted, someone she worked with daily, had deliberately put her life at risk. Who? Still investigating. But Hayes claims he has additional information about the corruption, specifically about one officer in particular, and he'll only discuss it with you directly. Sarah stared at the hospital ceiling, trying to process the implications. Vito Hayes was offering to expose police corruption, but only if she agreed to see him personally. It felt like manipulation, but it also felt like something else, like he genuinely wanted to see her again. There's something else, Chen continued. Hayes' financial records show that he donated anonymously to several charities focused on human trafficking victims. Substantial donations, going back almost 6 months. Either he's the most conflicted criminal we've ever encountered, or there's more to his story than we initially understood. The revelation shouldn't have surprised Sarah, but it did. During her months of surveillance, she'd seen glimpses of behavior that didn't fit the standard criminal profile, moments of genuine concern for people in his organization, business decisions that prioritized employee welfare over profit, small actions that suggested someone wrestling with the moral implications of his choices. Detective Mitchell, Chen said gently, I know this is complicated, but we need to understand what motivated Hayes to surrender and cooperate. Your perspective could be crucial. Sarah closed her eyes and tried to separate her professional obligations from the confusing emotions surrounding her memories of Vito Hayes. The man had built a criminal empire that facilitated some of the worst crimes imaginable. He'd also saved her life when he could have easily let her die. If I agree to see him, it's under controlled conditions. Recorded interview, federal oversight, and I want backup present. Chen nodded. Of course. But Sarah, be careful. Hayes is intelligent, charismatic, and he's had 3 days to prepare whatever he wants to say to you. Don't let him manipulate your perception of what happened. As Chen left to arrange the meeting, Sarah found herself staring out the hospital window at the Miami skyline. Somewhere in that maze of buildings, Vito Hayes was sitting in a federal holding cell, waiting to explain why he'd chosen saving her life over preserving his freedom. She told herself it was purely professional curiosity, but the flutter in her chest suggested otherwise. In 48 hours, she'd be sitting across from the man who'd caught her when she fell, and she had no idea whether he was her savior or the most dangerous person she'd ever met. The truth, she suspected, was probably both. The Federal Holding Facility's interview room felt like a stage set for the final act of a play neither Sarah nor Vito had expected to perform, with bulletproof glass, monitoring cameras, and the weight of everything unspoken between them filling the sterile space. Sarah sat across from the man who'd saved her life 72 hours earlier, noting how prison scrubs somehow made him look more dangerous rather than diminished, his dark eyes holding the same intensity that had burned through her disguise months ago. "If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from." "Detective Mitchell," Vito said, his voice carrying the same calm authority she remembered from the warehouse. "I'm glad to see you're recovering well." Sarah fought the urge to touch her shoulder wound, still tender beneath the bandages. "Mr. Hayes, Agent Chen tells me you have information about corruption in my department." "Among other things." Vito leaned back in his chair, somehow managing to look relaxed despite the handcuffs. "But first, I need to ask you something. Do you believe people can change?" The question caught her off guard. Sarah had expected tactical discussion, legal maneuvering, or criminal psychology. She hadn't expected philosophy. "That depends on whether they want to change or just want to avoid consequences." Vito smiled, and for a moment, the expression transformed his face entirely. Sarah could see why he'd been successful in legitimate business. There was warmth there, genuine charm beneath the calculated exterior. "Fair answer. For the record, I'm facing life in federal prison regardless of my cooperation. The evidence I've provided guarantees that. So this isn't about avoiding consequences." Sarah studied his face, looking for tells, for signs of deception. Her training screamed that this was manipulation, that career criminals didn't suddenly develop consciences, but her instincts, the same ones that had kept her alive during 6 months undercover, suggested something different. "Then what is it about?" Vito was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming against the metal table. 3 months ago, my organization processed a payment for the Moreau cartel, $60 million from human trafficking operations. When I saw the transaction details, I told myself it was just business, numbers on a screen. His voice grew quieter. 2 weeks later, I read a news report about 12 children rescued from a trafficking ring in Guatemala, children aged 6 to 14. The article mentioned that the rescue was possible because someone had provided financial intelligence to law enforcement. Sarah felt her breath catch. She remembered that case, a joint operation between FBI and international agencies that had saved dozens of children and dismantled a major trafficking network. "You provided that intelligence." "I did. Anonymously through encrypted channels, but yes," Vito met her eyes directly. "Those 12 children are alive and free because I chose to betray my client's trust. It was the first time I'd ever prioritized what was right over what was profitable." The admission hung between them, like a bridge Sarah wasn't sure she wanted to cross. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you need to understand what happened in that warehouse. When I saw you bleeding, when I realized you might die because of decisions I'd made, something broke inside me. Not just guilt or fear, recognition. You represented everything I'd convinced myself didn't exist anymore." Sarah found herself leaning forward despite her professional training. "Which was? Justice, honor, the belief that some things are worth risking everything to protect." Vito's voice carried a conviction that made her chest tighten. "You spent 6 months in danger to expose what you believed was wrong. You were willing to die for that principle. When I saw you in my office, I realized I wanted to be someone worthy of that kind of courage." The federal agent in Sarah recognized skilled emotional manipulation, but the woman who'd spent months watching Vito Hayes saw something different: vulnerability that couldn't be faked, pain that came from genuine self-reflection. "They're both the specific corruption in my department," she said, forcing herself back to professional ground. Vito nodded and pulled a small notebook from his pocket. Somehow he'd been allowed to keep it. "Detective Richard Baxter, 15-year veteran, gambling addiction, divorced twice. He's been providing my organization with intelligence about federal investigations for 18 months. Sarah felt the betrayal like a physical blow. Baxter had been her training officer, someone she'd trusted completely. You have proof? Financial records, recorded conversations, documentation of information exchanges, everything you need for prosecution. Vito slid the notebook across the table. It's all in there. Sarah opened it to find meticulous records, dates, amounts, specific intelligence Baxter had provided. The detail was overwhelming, the evidence irrefutable. Why didn't you tell Agent Chen? Because I wanted you to hear it first. Baxter's betrayal put your life at risk specifically. You deserve to know before anyone else. They sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of revelations settling between them. Sarah found herself studying Vito's hands, remembering how gentle they'd been when he'd treated her wounds, how steady when everything around them was chaos. What happens now? She asked finally. Now? I serve my time. Probably in federal protective custody, given how many criminal organizations I've betrayed. You recover, continue your career, and hopefully remember that sometimes the worst people are capable of doing the right thing. Sarah realized she didn't want this conversation to end, which terrified her more than facing armed criminals in a warehouse. Vito, Detective Mitchell, he interrupted gently. I know what you're thinking. I can see it in your eyes. But I'm not a good man who made bad choices. I'm a criminal who finally chose to stop hiding from what that meant. People can change, Sarah said, repeating his earlier question. Some can. But change requires more than good intentions. It requires accepting the consequences of who you used to be. Vito stood, the handcuffs clinking softly. I saved your life because you reminded me that honor still exists in the world. That has to be enough. As federal marshals prepared to escort Vito back to his cell, he paused at the door. Detective Mitchell, be careful who you trust. I've already provided the FBI with evidence about other corrupt officers, but Baxter was the one who targeted you specifically. The clarification sent chills down Sarah's spine, but before she could ask for details, Vito was gone, leaving her alone with evidence of betrayal and the uncomfortable realization that the most honest conversation she'd had in months was with a confessed criminal. 3 months later, Sarah returned to duty with a commendation for her undercover work and the satisfaction of knowing that Vito Hayes' cooperation had dismantled money laundering networks across 3 continents. Detective Baxter was in federal custody, along with 2 other corrupt officers Vito had identified. But late at night, when the adrenaline of the job faded and she was alone with her thoughts, Sarah found herself thinking about dark eyes that had shown genuine concern, hands that had saved her life, and a voice that had promised she'd survive when survival seemed impossible. Vito Hayes was serving 25 to life in federal prison, but somehow he'd given her something precious in that warehouse, the reminder that redemption was always possible, even in the darkest circumstances, for those brave enough to choose it. And sometimes, late at night, she wondered if 25 years was long enough for a man to fully change, and whether she'd be brave enough to find out. The truth was more complicated than justice usually allowed, but then again, the best stories always were.